All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody, thanks for joining us. We've still got quite a few more to come on, so we're just going to have a slow start here. My name's Pip. I am the Manager of Family Voices of California, and my colleague Alison Gray is also helping organize this webinar. And before we introduce our wonderful speaker, Christina, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about the platform that we're using. There will be time during and after the presentation to ask questions, so please type them in the question box that you can see on your attendee panel screen. And just a few notes about the technology. If you don't have a headset for your computer, you can join us by telephone by clicking on the little telephone icon on your attendee panel screen, and it will give you the number there to call into. And if you have any technical difficulties, please call GoToWebinar directly. It's 1-800-263-6317. And owing to feedback issues, we have everybody on mute from our end. So we look forward to getting your questions that you type into the question box. So now it's my pleasure to hand the reins over to Alison, who's going to update you on, give you a few words on project leadership and introduce our speaker, Christina Pena. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Pip. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. For those of you on the webinar who are not familiar with project leadership, Family Voices of California Project Leadership, I am the State Leadership Liaison with Family Voices and for project leadership. And the project was originally designed to increase the capacity of families to partner in the development and oversight of services, systems, and programs upon which they and their children depend. The project features a comprehensive training curriculum paired with mentoring and support that prepares families to build partnerships with professionals, take on leadership roles, and engage in public policy advocacy on behalf of children and youth with special health care needs. The project is funded by the Lucille Packard Foundation for Children's Health, and we are currently in our third year. We have 125 graduates from San Diego County, San Francisco County, Alameda County, as well as Napa County. Santa Barbara started implementing trainings just this month, and in Los Angeles, in Contra Costa, and San Bernardino, there are family resource centers there that are in the planning process for implementing the trainings. Pending funding approval from Lucille Packard Foundation for Children's Health, we will begin a fourth grant cycle in October of this year. I'll now go ahead and introduce our speaker. Christina Jade Pena is the Chief Committee Consultant for the Senate Select Committee on Children with Special Needs. She has over a decade of experience working on advancing equitable health policy and improving access to health information and services for vulnerable and underserved populations, with an emphasis on people living with HIV, women and children, and youth. Ms. Pena's skill set centers on program design and implementation, policy analysis, including quantitative and qualitative evaluation, capacity building and technical training, strategic coordination and communication, advanced writing, and ability to systematically present findings. Prior to this role, Christina consulted for the Kaiser Family Foundation, working on analysis of the post-implementation of the Affordable Care Act and access to health care services. Christina holds a master's in public policy with an emphasis on health policy from the University of California, Berkeley, and a bachelor's of arts in communication and journalism from the University of Southern California. And now, Christina, I will turn the presentation over to you. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you very much, Alison, for the wonderful introduction. Good afternoon to everybody in today's webinar, and thank you so much for joining us on this webinar about the California Senate Select Committee on Children with Special Needs. I want to express a big thank you to Family Voices for hosting today's webinar, and of course for Pip and Allison's great support. I also want to thank the Family Voices Project Leadership graduates, particularly for your interest in learning more about the Select Committee and the work that's being done, and then also for extending this invitation to the Family Resource Center's Network of California Steering Committee, who I also believe is on the call for their lunch break. So thank you so much to everyone who's joining us for this next hour. Let me make sure I can move my slides. There we go. So here's just a quick overview of what we're going to discuss today. This webinar is really meant to provide an introduction of the Senate Select Committee on Children with Special Needs. And in doing so, the goal is to provide a brief background of the Select Committee, a little bit of a historical background. It's relatively new, but I'll go into that. Also, I'd like to discuss our current strategy, some of our focal points and objectives, touch briefly on the Select Committee activities thus far and what we've been able to accomplish, and then briefly touch on the role of family advocates in informing the committee as we move forward with priority areas. And as Pip shared, we will have questions. We'll break for questions twice throughout the webinar. So after we discuss the background and strategy, we'll have an intermediate break for questions that are generated, and then again at the end. So plenty of time to try to answer any questions you may have. So let's go ahead and dive into the background. The Senate Select Committee on Children with Special Needs was recently established, or it feels like it's a recent establishment. It was established in the fall of 2015, and it's chaired by Senator Dr. Richard Pan. For those who may be familiar with Senator Richard Pan, his district is in Sacramento, and it includes West Sacramento and Elk Grove area. And Senator Pan is a pediatrician, and he actually continues his practice part-time while he's holding office. Senator Pan was first elected to the State Assembly in 2010, and then he was elected to the State Senate, and he's currently serving his first term as a state senator. Senator Pan is also well known for his Senate Bill 277, also known as the vaccine bill, and this was signed into law last year by Governor Brown, and really the legislation for this bill looked at abolishing or ending the use of non-medical exemptions for legally required vaccines in schools. And really this was around the assumption that the goal was to keep children, particularly children with special needs or particular health needs, in a safe community environment through the concept of herd immunity or community immunity. So his name might ring a bell if you followed that particular bill as it moved through the legislature. I'm pleased to say that our Select Committee has bipartisan support. We have 7 members, including Dr. Pan. I actually interact, Dr. Pan, Senator Pan, I interchange his title, so I apologize. I'll try to stick to one. Senator Pan. So 7 members in total. Bipartisan support. We have 2 Republicans and 5 Democrats, and our senators include Senator Jen Fuller, Senator Ted Gaines, Senator Jerry Hill, Senator Ben Wesso, Senator Carol Liu, and Senator Holly Mitchell. And as with Senator Pan, who's really passionate about issues pertaining to children, particularly within the medical field, several of our committee members are passionate about issues pertaining to children, ranging from children's health, education, and well-being. So many of our members have a long history working on policy and legislation pertaining to children's needs. And before I dive into what our committee is focused on doing primarily, I just want to provide a brief clarification regarding the differences between a select committee and what's traditionally known as a standing committee. Standing committees are what most people think of when they're thinking of the legislature and hearings. And what standing committees do is they meet on a regular basis. They're legislative in nature. And what I mean by this is bills are typically introduced to a respective chamber, either an assembly or a senate, and then based on the bill's legislative intent or code or area, it's then heard by a particular standing committee. So for example, with Senator Pan's SB 277 vaccine bill, because it dealt with schools, it dealt with health, it dealt with public safety, it was actually heard by a number of different standing committees, and it had to move through those through vote in order to be passed into law. So several of our members, of course, are on a number of standing committees, and that's really where you get bills passed into law. Now, the Select Committee is very different from this. We have really no role in moving law forward in terms of passage of a bill, but what we do is we are investigative in nature. So we offer the ability to look into a particular topic or area of interest with a specific purpose, and oftentimes select committees are formed for a certain number of years. Senator Pan has expressed he'd like to keep the Select Committee alive and active throughout his first term, with the goal of possibly doing it in his second term, but he really sees a lot of potential with this particular topic, children with special health needs. And so the intent is to keep this particular Select Committee active for a longer time than just a year or even 2 years. Something that's really nice about select committees is it allows us to dive into a particular topic of interest, but also gain consensus from community members and legislative members, and really look into a particular topic from an investigative strategic lens and build a sense of stakeholder solutions and recommendations, and bring greater attention to a particular issue. So really, it gives us the ability to investigate and then ideally propose policy solutions or amendments to current law that would produce some type of result. And before I dive into what our strategy is and what our main purpose is, I do want to share that the Lucille Packard Foundation for Children's Health, it also plays an integral role with the Select Committee on Children with Special Needs. Since the Select Committee was established, the Lucille Packard Foundation for Children's Health has provided funding to support research, policy analysis, and administrative duties related to the Select Committee. Something interesting is this particular structure was actually based off of another Select Committee that took place 2 years ago. It was the Aging and Long-Term Care Select Committee, and this was supported by the SCAN Foundation, who, if you're familiar with it, they provide a number of support and coordination and policy analysis around coordinated and navigated systems of care for older populations. And what's interesting is Senator Carol Liu actually chaired that particular committee. So the structure of our committee in some ways follows this other structure that took place not too long ago. And just to kind of share, I know Allison was able to provide a little bit about my background, but in my current role supporting the Select Committee on Children with Special Needs, I primarily provide policy research and analysis. I help coordinate all of the committee hearings and any of the committee activities that take place. I also provide leadership in collaboration efforts with our various stakeholders, and in many ways I act as a liaison to the Lucille Packard Foundation on Children's Health in terms of what they're doing on the ground and how that may fit in informing the Select Committee on Children with Special Needs. So let's move into the Select Committee itself and our strategy. And really from the beginning, the Select Committee on Children with Special Needs was really formed to accomplish these 3 key items. One, we wanted to increase understanding of how programs and services for children and youth with special and complex needs are implemented and delivered in California. And really, Senator Pan has shared this vocally during the first hearing, and when he speaks about this committee, he really wants to understand what's working between systems of care, what programs are working with other programs, and more importantly, understand what's not working between programs and support systems in place for families and children. The second key purpose is to really identify ways to strengthen and integrate systems of care for children, youth, and their families. And this would be done through policy, program, and even fiscal recommendations and findings that come out of our investigation. And really it comes from the realization that there is fragmentation that takes place. We've heard this from families, we've heard this from researchers, we've heard this from experts, from providers. There really is an awareness that fragmentation exists and so many services are siloed. And with that recognition, the Select Committee wants to dive into ways, or what would be possible solutions, ways to really strengthen and better integrate systems of care. Another item that we'd like to accomplish and kind of create is really build partnerships. And we want to do it between key stakeholders and policy leaders. So something Senator Pan is really adamant on is ensuring that we have a space created for candid conversations that do focus on solutions or policy alternatives to really challenging inefficiencies that we're finding. And he really does want to bring stakeholders from diverse walks of life, families, providers, administrative leaders in the room with policy leaders so that there is an exchange of ideas and that there is an ongoing dialogue that takes place over really relevant issues that we're seeing that happen today as we know it. In terms of our focus, Senator Pan wanted to lead this committee on focusing on 4 principal systems of care. So in looking at areas relating to children with special and complex needs, we really want to focus on systems of care related to physical health, and this includes both chronic and acute illness that requires specialty care and services. We also want to look at that in conjunction with mental health, developmental disability needs, and then education, and education within the landscape of special education. So again, going back to the core, how are systems of care delivered, how are they integrated or not, who's working with who, and how can we support policy recommendations or policy avenues to further integrate and strengthen care and services for families who may need services from multiple different care systems. In terms of our particular population, we're looking at children from birth to 21, which is very wide. Clearly there are intricacies with each age group and each age range, but this was intentional in some parts because we recognize that children and youth, and particularly transitioning youth, still require services and needs, and that there is a disconnect between the pediatric world, in some cases, and the adult healthcare world, and you could argue that within all 4 systems of care. We also look at children with a very broad lens, so we included children with special and complex needs broadly speaking, and this was again very intentional. We've expanded on the Maternal and Child Health Bureau definition as they define children with special health needs, and this was done so we're inclusive of all children. Children who may suffer from trauma, for example, children who may be part of the foster care environment and require specialty needs, and may have co-needs, multiple needs. And so while we're not, we're not direct on one particular population, it is really inclusive, and it was done so intentionally, which is also is wonderful because it lends us to do a lot, but also challenging because we have such a wide range to look at. The other big item is that we're looking at, of course, services and programs as they relate to the state of California. So children that receive services at some point, whether it's full-time or part-time basis, in the state of California. And while there is still an interest in looking at how other states are choosing to provide services and deliver programs, design programs, and deliver services, we really are focused on California and California counties. So after our first hearing, which really kind of just got out of the gate, and we have slides that break down the first hearing and the second hearing. Our next real step after we knew who our focal population was, what we wanted to achieve, kind of our range in terms of what the Select Committee was looking at, we really needed to have a better sense of what our objectives are. What could we realistically accomplish. And in many ways, this has been a really organic process. It came from the beginning, moving into what can we achieve? Is there even interest for this particular committee? What is the formation going to look like? Do we have interest from stakeholders? All of which has been answered in the last several months. And now we're at a place where we're really looking at what we can achieve in the given year, year 1, year 2, and if possible, year 3. And for all of our committee activities are really tied to these 5 objectives. So objective number 1, we want to elevate visibility of the diverse needs and challenges affecting children and youth with special and complex needs and their families. Something that we realized was that the Select Committee, while it's investigative in nature, and the goal is to come up with tangible policy solutions, we can do much more than just that. We can clearly elevate visibility and create some dialogue in the community about the needs of children and youth with special and complex needs, and more importantly, their families. And so Senator Pan has seen this as a really important vehicle to do so. Number 2 is to educate our state policy makers and administrative leaders. Again, something that we've been trying to look at and recognize is that our committee members, as well as the legislators, state legislators, have varying degrees of understanding and knowledge of programs and services for children with special needs. And so part of the Select Committee's role is to really ensure that committee members and fellow state legislators have a benchmark understanding of these programs and services before we really tackle what we need to do to strengthen them. So in part, since really its establishment, the Select Committee has really reached out and trying to really elevate the issues and then also educate policymakers and come to like a benchmark understanding. In addition, we really want to, as known, identify inefficiencies, barriers, and challenges hindering or adversely affecting children with special and complex needs and their families. Fourth, in doing so, we need to gather evidence and evaluate proposed recommendations. And then our last key objective would be to advance policy and program change. And again, that's after we've gone through in-depth analysis. We can get to that final stage or that final objective. But as we move forward, all of the objectives play a role into reaching that final goal, which would be improving the systems of care as they currently stand. So really, each objective builds off of each other and is very much integral to what activities we choose to move forward with. I'm going to briefly touch on the process, and then we can break for questions. And the reason I'm sharing this process is largely because I want everyone to realize that we're really in our early phase of investigation. Some committees only last for a year, some select committees last for 4 years. We're very much looking at the long road down, so we're not trying to rush this in any way, shape, or form, and in part because we are looking at such a wide range. We're looking at 4 systems of care, which, as you know, are very complex in their own nature. We're looking at multiple programs and services. We're looking at various age brackets and range in terms of when you can access services. And there's a sense of being diligent in going about that investigation and examination as strategic as possible and as transparent as possible. So the reason I break down these phases is really to let everyone know on the call that we're really in phase 1 and very much in the early part of phase 1, even though we've existed for 8 months now. So really, phase 1, we're surveying the landscape. We're getting a sense of what's currently taking place in the state of California. Our first 2 hearings were very broad intentionally to really look at systems of care, introduce them, get a gauge of what might be taking place, and just an early identification of opportunities for potential action or policy. We're also doing consultations with various stakeholders, and this includes Family Voices, for example, Children Now, Lucille Packard Foundation, a number of different departments and agencies at both the state level and the county level, and then of course engaging with families when we can, to really just kind of create dialogue, so really soliciting information. And this phase will likely take place for the remainder of this year and the beginning of next year. And really, you know, what the whole phase includes, as I said, really a gathering sense. We're really gathering and soliciting information as it stands, data, records, holding informational committee hearings, consultations, attending conferences and symposiums on related issues, and really quite a bit of independent research and analysis, and very early. Phase 2 will be the evaluation process, and that's where we get to really go into a deep dive analysis. And this will take place once the select committee has narrowed its focus. And this is going to relate to what is achievable in the first year versus what topics may need to be worked on over many years. As you know, there's the low-hanging fruit that is something we might be able to tackle within a given year, and then areas of interest or challenges that may take a longer length of time. And then, of course, phase 3 would be once we've determined and there's consensus on the policy solutions, disseminating it and promoting it. And really that goes into lobbying and working with our committee members, working with fellow legislators, and really pushing for these policy changes to take place, whether it be through traditional legislative activity or internally with the departments. That's what phase 3 will consist of. So I'm going to take a pause. I feel like I've given everyone a lot of information. I'm going to break for questions.
Thanks,
and then go ahead, Pip.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's excellent. No questions have come in, actually. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There's a question from one of the attendees. In your first slide, examples were provided about topics the committee considers. Can you please elaborate more on your California-Mexico collaboration?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So going back to that first slide, and I'm happy to bring it all the way back, that was just, those were just, I'm sorry, I didn't clarify that. The examples provided were really examples of select committees that have existed. So we did have a select committee on aging and long-term health care. We had a select committee on mental health. There's a select committee on California-Mexico cooperation, a select committee chaired by Senator Holly Mitchell on women and inequality. This was just to provide examples where it's very much topic-specific, opposed to standing committees, which are a broader topic, for example, health. All bills related to health would have to go through a standing committee and be heard and introduced. Same with education or environmental quality. So the only reason I provided those examples was to showcase different types of committees. The examples don't directly relate to the Select Committee on Children with Special Needs. We have even narrower topics of interest that are just related to children with special needs. So I hope that answers that.
Thanks, Christina. Nothing else has come in.
Do we have any other questions?
Oh, there is one. In phase 1, one of the, hold on, let me see that. Oh, that question just disappeared. Alison, I think, do you have a question? Hold on, Christina, sorry, I'm just trying to find it.
Not a problem.
Hi, this is Alison. Christina, you might address this in your next part of your presentation, but I was wondering, you mentioned one of the objectives during this phase 1 is identifying opportunities for action as well as policy recommendations, and I'm wondering if the committee has already identified any specific opportunities for action or any policy recommendations at this point.
No, that's a great question. Thank you, Allison. So it's tricky to answer that question because we don't have any direct policy recommendations yet, and in part because we still have to gather the evidence and build a consensus within the committee members to really, before we're able to actually release that recommendation. Given how large of a a topic we're looking at and large of a population, we're likely not going to have specific policy recommendations coming out of this year. And really, we're eyeballing the following year to release that report. But there are key areas of interest, and my next slides kind of go into that. But I'll just briefly say there is interest, for example, in transition, and particularly transition from pediatric care to adult care. There's interest in transition between services based on age bracket. So from age 3 to age 5, from age 5 to age 6, from age when children turn 18, and then again when they turn 21. There's also interest in transition as it relates to county services. Oftentimes services are accessible based on the county you reside in, and those services can be quite different between counties. But what we do recognize is that oftentimes families are not necessarily living in just one county. You can have children living with multiple caregivers and multiple relatives throughout different counties. So when we think of transition, we've looked at it in from different lenses, and so that's an area of interest. Also of interest is mental health. As you may know, there's quite a few bills currently in the legislature looking at mental health services and access, particularly within education, and that's something that the Select Committee would like to piggyback on if there's ways to improve access to mental health providers, and particularly specialty mental health providers for children. So that's been flagged as an area of interest. So if you can visualize a board, we have a number of flagged areas that Senator Pan and the committee members are aware of, and now it's a matter of creating a timeline based on what's achievable. So while we don't have direct recommendations coming out just yet, there's areas of interest that have potential. And where we're going to go is moving into committees that are more focused in nature. So instead of taking a broad lens, really looking at select committees that maybe solely address transition to care for aging out populations, or a select committee that solely addresses telehealth, for example, and how to support and fund telehealth services, how to, where's the need for telehealth services, really trying to tackle more poignant, direct items.
Thanks, Christine.
So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, there's one more question that just came in, Christina. Will you be discussing on this webinar children with special needs and education?
I'm not going to go into detail about the topic of education. This is more of this particular webinar was organized as an introduction, so it's really to give an overview. I think there may be potential, and Pip, we may want to talk about this, to have a follow-up webinar where it really dives into more of the concrete items that have come up and the research behind them, or the current analysis that's taking place. That might be something in the future, but this is really more of a broader overview of where we're at and where we're going, opposed to specific concrete items.
Okay. So nothing more has come in, so I think back to your presentation.
Great, and this might answer a lot of the questions that may have not come in, but now the second half will really dive into the Select Committee on Children with Special Needs and what we're doing. So let's go into a recap. So as I said, the Select Committee was launched in the fall of 2015, and really from the beginning we really hit the ground running. I was brought on board October 2015, and immediately from the start, Senator Pan was adamant on holding our first hearing. And part of this was because he was excited. We wanted to launch our first introduction hearing, but also throughout the year, select committees have a limited number of hearings they can hold. So it can be kind of challenging in terms of which topics we can select. I wish we could hold a hearing every month, but we just can't do that based on what we're required or not required to be able to do. So Senator Pan really wanted to go straight out the gate. So we held our first hearing in December, and it was December 1st, 2015. And this hearing was really to provide an introduction of the systems of care. We brought in administrative leaders from the state, the county, and the local level to really provide an overview of what was being done in terms of services, eligibility, funding streams, and also provide an opportunity to, again, solicit problem areas or challenge areas that might be happening on the ground, and then what recommendations might come from that. We also held our second hearing, which was April 5th, and this looked at interagency care coordination between departments and agencies at the state and local level, and then also tried to address pilot programs or nuanced committees that are happening at the local level or the county level to try to address interagency care coordination. And what we've been able to release is a summary report from the first hearing, which is quite lengthy, but it does set up a nice visual of all of the items really on the table to look at. The second hearing report is currently in the works. We were also able to do a brief on mapping systems of care, and this accompanied our first hearing. And then we also were able to put together a video introducing the Select Committee on Children with Special Needs. And you may be familiar with Wendy Longwell. She was part of that release, and her son Derek, and they were part of that particular video. And if you think back to our objectives, those particular released items relate directly to our objective items. So objective 1, elevating visibility, that was through this multimedia approach of having a video, having something that lives online that is visually accessible for people aside from just a document. The policy brief is meant to inform our committee members, and all of our committee members receive this before the first hearing to really give them a synopsis or a summary of each system of care and a list of all of the programs within that system, who's responsible for it, what the eligibility requirements are, what the services are, and also important, what the funding looks like for the 2015 year. And then the summary hearing report is, again, just early addressing those inefficiencies as we see them. So, and I did already kind of break down the committee hearings, but I would, and I have other slides that show where the Select Committee documents are. They're all on our Select Committee website. I would really suggest that everyone who's interested in knowing what we're doing to take a look at the first hearing report. It does provide a summary of the takeaways that came out of that hearing. It does have a very long meeting minutes that are included in all of the presenters' PowerPoint slides, but more importantly, it does summarize what the takeaways were and what the recommendations were from our panel speakers. And again, these are recommendations from the panel speakers and the panels that we're soliciting for our hearings, not from the committee members themselves. But it does give you an early snapshot of what's on the agenda, what's being considered, because it is coming out of these hearings and consultations with stakeholders in terms of identifying what might be priority areas for the given year. And then next steps. So we are in the process of assessing our findings from the first 2 hearings. We're also holding consultations with stakeholders. So this summer we've met with the Department of Healthcare Services, the Department of Disability Services, and California Department of Education. And we're really speaking to them to follow up on some of the items that have come out of hearing 1 and hearing 2, and really try to build early consensus about topics that the committee members have expressed interest in exploring further, and getting a gauge if this is also on the department's radar. Same with a number of advocacy groups, as well as community leaders. And then we're now looking at all of these topics and really trying to prioritize them around a timeline. So again, what might be considered low-hanging fruit, something that we could potentially address in the next year, opposed to a area of interest we need multiple hearings or ongoing research in order to really come up with feasible solutions. So right now we're still in that very early phase of looking at our menu of options and trying to really solidify what can we actually achieve and how realistic is it, and is there consensus already, and can we build it? To move forward into the committee hearings, it's likely that, as I said, we're going to move down from a very broad focus to a much more narrow focus. So mental health's been shared as being a prime interest. Data sharing and integration is something of interest. As I shared, aging out or transition is an area of interest. Looking at family support and how to support family engagement and family education is something that's also come up. So again, these are items. Can we tackle them? Should they happen at the end of this year? Is that a hearing, committee hearing that would be best suited for next year? And how do we organize that in a way that makes sense and appeases all of our committee members and we're all on the same page? So a lot of that's happening this summer going into the fall. And then I want to move into involvement and how important families are to this entire process. So the role of family advocates, as I shared, we're constantly doing consultations with various groups, and these are more private consultations, and they really follow up on the 2 hearings that we've had and conversation that's happened in our hearings. And the role that family members have is very much informing the committee on where our priority areas are. And I don't want to say that you're the canary in the mine frame or the mine tunnel, because that's a bit negative, but really oftentimes family members voice where their immediate challenges in their real life scenario, why they're not able to access a particular service, or if something doesn't make sense. And sometimes that can be more of a isolated experience, but oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it is kind of a symptom of a larger challenge. Maybe there is, you know, a system inefficiency at play. Maybe something's not clear in a particular county. Maybe that same barrier is happening across counties. And so families really lend that on-the-ground experience that we have an ear open to. Oftentimes you hear, you know, from different stakeholders, different perspectives. Clearly, children's hospitals and a number of service providers have one version of how they're delivering services. The administration has another version of how they're moving forward with delivery of services and programs. And then, of course, the families and the children who are accessing those have a very different viewpoint of how they're receiving those services. And part of our role is really making sure that all of those voices are brought to the table and that we're able to look at that across, you know, across stakeholders and narrow our focus. So a clear way that families are part of it is really with our committee hearings. I don't think we'll ever have a committee hearing without families involved. From day one, Senator Pan's been really adamant on always ensuring that families are included. Ideally, we'd like more families than 1 or 2, and Family Voices has been wonderful with working with us and being in communication to identify families that show interest, but also for those families that I haven't had an opportunity to meet, either at the Family Voices Health Summit or through these particular consultations or hearings. Even expressing your interest is huge, and reaching out to me or to Darren or to Pip is really important, just to flag that you have interest past, you know, in terms of a committee hearing or activities like a press conference like what Wendy and Derek were a part of, or any future stakeholder meetings or consultations. Clearly sharing personal testimony is huge. That's recorded, that's included in our notes and in our internal investigation, helping us identify those challenges and barriers to care, and also the recommendations for improvement. Oftentimes it's a two-sided coin. We often hear what the challenge is, but the next follow-up question is, what is the solution, or what do you think would work? And oftentimes that's on our onus to try to figure that out, but it does happen in communication with the families who are accessing those services and know firsthand. And then the last big role is really disseminating select committee activities and publications. So sharing the video with your friends, with family members, with other advocates that you feel are on board with a particular topic. as we move forward and have a better stance in terms of what our priority areas are, that's going to be communicated on our website, and I think that'll allow itself to have a clearer focus on where advocates would be of use, either backing a particular policy recommendation and going in and speaking with legislators, writing their legislators or policy representatives, working with us to build a rapport with the committee members, things of that nature. And that would be really phase 2 and phase 3. But again, we're still in phase 1 where it's really just soliciting and casting a wide net on what's taking place.
Christina, this is Christina.
Yeah.
Someone is asking, how do family members find out about committee hearings? Do you have a mailing list or something where people can sign up?
So it's tricky. I've been wanting to do a mailing list since I came on board, and unfortunately, because of rules and regulations within the legislature, I'm not actually able to do that. I've been pushing for it. So we don't have a direct sign-up list. It's something I'm still working on, and unfortunately, anything that we do with the Select Committee has to go through another Rules Committee to get passed. So it is something that's in the works, but it's not set up as of now. What I would suggest is looking for updates 2 places. One, everything's going to come up on our Select Committee website, which the link is on the PowerPoint. It's the first one. If not, if you look at, even if you Google Select Committee on Children with Special Needs, it should take you to the Senate website. And this is where we house our hearings, any publications, any updates. If we have our future hearing, will be updated through this website. But then we also communicate to, for example, Family Voices or Lucille Packard Foundation, where we're included in any newsletters that go out to the community. But we're still engaged in building that network. So I'm absolutely open to anyone who would like to be in contact with me to either put on a newsletter or put updates on a mailing list, or really kind of build a greater momentum and really widen our group of stakeholders. So it's still very much in the process.
Great. Okay, thanks.
And then I'm back to questions.
Nothing new, but I think if we give everybody time, there might be some.
And I also have on this last page my contact information, so anybody's welcome to email me. I also included Darren Walsh. She's the Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Pan, and actually the 2 of us work directly on the Select Committee with Children with Special Needs. Darren Walsh is clearly in direct communication with Senator Pan at all times. I'm usually in Sacramento pretty regularly. I'm not based in Sacramento, but I'm often in Sacramento every week. But between the 2 of us, we're really looking at how the Select Committee is going to move forward in collaboration with Senator Pan's leadership and really the committee members, and how they'd like to move this vehicle forward.
Christine, someone is asking, how proactive is Senator Pan with the changes that are being made to CCS, the current changes being made to CCS, California Children?
So that's a great question. So we're following CCS redesign very closely. I've been in all of the stakeholder meetings that have taken place, and it's really challenging because there's legislation that's in the works now related to CCS redesign, particularly SB 586, Ed Hernandez's bill. And really, Senator Pan's limited. We can't do anything until we know what's passed or hasn't passed. So we are keeping an eye on it. It is something of interest. When we're looking at topics of interest, CCS redesign is something as a priority area, although we have to see what we can do. Some of the concerns are, completely stopping the movement of to managed care plans is going to be tricky. And we don't have a particular consensus on that, but what we do recognize is that there's opportunity for the process that's taking place, so ensuring that there's plan readiness, that there's transition safety guards in place, looking at creating policy that would ensure that that's supported and that children are not falling through the cracks. Clearly there's opportunity there, but it is going to be really, it's going to have to go through quite a bit of negotiation and quite a bit of analysis. So we have an eye on it. We're absolutely following it, but we're limited in what we can do until this set of bills either pass or don't pass.
And I hear that we will know whether the bill is passed or vetoed by the end of September.
Correct. Because I believe it's waiting to be an appropriation.
Yes. Yeah.
So and again, there's many steps as you all are aware of, and it's interesting because from on the internal side, even Senator Pan, he doesn't know firsthand, even though he's directly he has his eye on the pulse here, his ear on the pulse, whatever the statement is. He's directly aware of what's happening, but even with how things move forward, we're limited until we know it comes September, and then we're able to really take other actions or take action.
Great. There's a message here, Christina, from the Family Resource Center Network of California, who say they would be happy to assist in identifying families who can provide testimony at the hearings.
Wonderful.
So that you would contact Debbie Sarmiento.
Excellent. And Pip, I absolutely look forward, and maybe this is something we can discuss with Family Resources Center Network of California, their steering committee, potentially holding a follow-up, what would be a consultation meeting where we meet with both groups and a number of families to really get a better sense of what some priority areas past, for example, the Family Voices Health Summit that took place early this year. But just as a follow-up, because again, we have an idea, but it's always important to continue and hold that dialogue on a regular basis, because certain items come up that maybe weren't on our particular radar or relates to another topic area that we're already looking at.
Great. Actually, Christina, someone's asking, could you go back to your previous slides so that they can see the web addresses that we were providing? Yeah, thank
absolutely.
you. Any other questions from anyone? Oh, and yes, we'll be sending the recording and the slides out to all the attendees. That will take a couple of days for us to get that, so it will also be up and available on our Family Voices website, which is familyvoicesofca.org, and you just go to webinars and archived recordings, I believe. Yeah. Well, Christina, thank you very, very much for updating us. It's really exciting, and yeah, we hopefully, another 6 months we might do this again so we can get updated further, or at the Health Summit next year in Sacramento. So thanks everybody for attending today. And Christine, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's it. I just want to send a big thank you, and please do, if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to email me. I absolutely look forward to continuing to work with families who are advocates and those who are new advocates to the scene, and really being part of this dialogue and making sure that everyone's part of the dialogue and the solutions moving forward.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.